The rain fell like bullets on the narrow streets of Itaewon, each drop exploding against the wet pavement in a rhythm that matched Ifunanya Okonkwo's hammering heart. Her braids, once carefully wrapped in a golden head, wrap her mother had given her years ago in Lagos, now clung to her face and neck, heavy with water and fear. Her worn sneakers, the only pair she owned, slapped against the concrete as she ran, lungs burning, the taste of copper flooding her mouth. Behind her, 3 men shouted in Korean. She didn't need to understand every word to know what they promised. Death, or worse. "Fucking bitch, stop running!" one of them yelled in English, his accent thick and brutal. Ife's hospital scrubs, pale blue, stained with a 12-hour shift's worth of blood, vomit, and desperation, clung to her body. She'd been walking home from her 3rd job of the day when they'd cornered her outside the convenience store. No warning, just hands grabbing, voices demanding. W42,000. 42,000,001. The number that had haunted her for 3 years. She turned sharp left into an alley, darker than the devil's throat. Praying for a miracle, she stopped believing in the day her ex-fiancé sold her like livestock. Her right ankle rolled on something, a bottle maybe, and pain shot up her leg. She stumbled but didn't fall. Couldn't fall. Falling meant going back to that container in Lagos where they'd kept her for 6 weeks before she escaped. Never again. The alley narrowed. Dumpsters on both sides created a maze of shadows and rot. The stench of garbage mixed with rain, a smell that reminded her of every bad decision that led her here. She vaulted over a pile of cardboard boxes, her nursing training making her body efficient even in panic. Behind her, the men's footsteps echoed, closer than before. "You owe us, Ifunanya!" the leader shouted. She recognized his voice, Chukwu, the bastard who'd found her in Seoul 6 months ago. "You can run to Japan, China, fucking Antarctica. We'll find you. Your body belongs to us until that debt is paid." Something inside her cracked. Not broke. It had broken years ago. This was different. This was the sound of the last piece of her dignity splintering. She wouldn't let them take her. She'd die first. Ife's hand went to the small knife in her pocket, a vegetable peeler she'd stolen from the hospital cafeteria. Pathetic. But it was sharp enough to open her own wrists if it came to that. The alley ended in a T-junction. Left or right? She couldn't see anything in the darkness, just the rain and the distant glow of neon signs reflecting off wet walls. She chose left. 3 steps in, her foot caught on something solid. Not a box, not a bag, a body. Ife went down hard, her palms scraping against concrete, her knee slamming into something that gave a wet, heavy thud. Pain exploded through her leg, but she scrambled to her feet immediately, survival instinct overriding everything else. "Shit," she breathed, her mother's Igbo accent bleeding through even though she'd tried to bury it years ago. She looked down. A man lay sprawled on the ground, face up in a puddle that reflected the red glow from a nearby sign. He wore a black suit, expensive, she could tell even in the darkness, the kind of Tom Ford or Dior that cost more than she made in a year. His white shirt was soaked red across the abdomen and chest. Blood. Too much blood. For a moment, one precious, stupid moment, Ifunanya Okonkwo, the terrified debtor, disappeared, and Nurse Okonkwo took over. She dropped to her knees beside him, fingers automatically going to his neck. Pulse. Faint. Thready. His skin was cold, lips slightly blue. Her hand moved to his chest, breathing shallow, maybe 10 breaths per minute. Her fingers found the source of blood, a wound on his right side, probably a stab, based on the clean edges she could feel through his soaked shirt. But there was something else, something wrong. His pupils were fixed and dilated even in the dim light. His extremities were cold, but his core was still warm. The blood flow was decreasing, but he wasn't in shock yet. Poison. She didn't know how she knew, but she knew. She'd seen it once in Lagos, a gang execution disguised as a mugging. Same symptoms. Chinekium, she whispered. My God in Igbo, the prayer automatic and useless. Behind her, at the mouth of the alley, she heard the men skid to a stop. There! Chukwu's voice. I see her! Ife's head snapped up. The three men stood silhouetted against the streetlight, their shapes predatory and certain. She looked down at the dying man, looked back at her hunters. Something crystallized in her mind, sharp and clear and absolutely insane. She didn't want to die, but she also didn't want to be the woman who left someone to die in a puddle in a forgotten alley in a city that didn't give a fuck about either of them. Her mother had died because they didn't have money for treatment, because no one cared enough to save her. Ife wouldn't be that person, even if it killed her. "Forgive me," she whispered to no one in particular. Maybe to the man, maybe to herself, maybe to God who'd stopped listening years ago. She hooked her arms under his shoulders and pulled. He was heavy. Solid muscle under that expensive suit. Dead weight, almost literally. But Ife had spent the last 3 years working in hospitals, lifting patients twice her size. She gritted her teeth and dragged him backward, toward a narrow gap between two dumpsters she'd noticed. "What the fuck is she doing?" one of the men shouted. "Who cares? Get her!" Ife pulled harder, her feet slipping in the puddle, her scrubs now soaked in his blood. She didn't think about what she was doing, didn't let herself think, just moved. She got him into the gap, barely wide enough for both of them, and pressed herself against the wall, his body partially covering hers. His blood was warm against her chest. His breathing was getting shallower. The men's footsteps came closer. Ife's hand pressed against the man's wound, applying pressure automatically, even though she knew it wouldn't help with poison. Her other hand went to his face, tilting his head to keep his airway open. His skin was cold as death. "She's here somewhere." Chukwu's voice was close now, maybe 10 feet away. Ife held her breath. The man in her arms wasn't breathing well enough to make noise. She could feel his heart struggling under her palm. Arrhythmic, failing. He was dying. In her arms. Right now. And she was going to die with him because she was too fucking stupid to keep running. Footsteps approached the dumpsters. Ife closed her eyes and pressed harder against the wound, her lips moving in silent prayer. The Igbo words her mother taught her, the ones for protection, for mercy, for the dying. Chineke, Biko. God, please. The footsteps stopped. Silence, except for the rain and the dying man's labored breathing. Then, from the mouth of the alley, a new voice shouted in Korean. Authority. Aggressive. Probably police. Chukwu cursed. "Move! Let's go!" The footsteps retreated, running. Ife didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't believe it. 30 seconds passed, a minute. Only rain and the man dying in her arms. She opened her eyes and looked down at his face. For the first time, she really saw him. He was beautiful, the kind of beautiful that belonged in Korean dramas her roommate watched, all sharp jawlines and elegant bones. Even pale and dying, his face had a cold, lethal perfection to it. His black hair was soaked and falling across his forehead. His lips, slightly parted, were bloodless. But his eyes were open now, barely, dark as hell, and fixed on her face. Pela primera vez en 17 años, Han Si-woo felt something other than the cold emptiness that had lived inside him since his mother's death. Warmth. It came from the woman's hands pressed against his wound, from her body heat seeping through his soaked clothes, from her breath on his face as she whispered prayers in a language he didn't understand. But more than that, it came from her eyes. She was crying, tears mixed with rain running down her dark skin, her full lips trembling as she pressed harder against his wound, like she could hold his life inside him through sheer will. No one had ever looked at him like that. Like his life mattered. Like losing him would break something in the world. Si-woo tried to speak, but his throat wouldn't work. The poison. Fucking amateur hour. He'd known the wine tasted wrong, but he'd drunk it anyway. Tired of being careful. Tired of living. Had paralyzed most of his voluntary muscles. But his eyes worked, and he stared at her. She was African. Nigerian, if he had to guess from the accent of her prayers. Her skin was deep brown, almost black in the shadows, and her face was all soft curves and fierce determination. She wore hospital scrubs soaked in his blood and rain, and her braids hung like ropes around her face. She was nobody, a stranger who'd literally tripped over him, and she'd stayed. She'd fucking stayed. "Don't die," she whispered in English, her voice breaking. "Please don't die. Biko, don't die." Something inside Siwoo's chest, something he thought died at 16 when he watched them destroy his mother, cracked open. He couldn't move his hand, but he tried. Tried to touch her face, her arm, anything to tell her that he heard her, that her voice was the first thing that made him want to live in 17 years. His fingers twitched. She noticed immediately, good nurse instincts, and grabbed his hand. Her palm was warm and rough with calluses and absolutely perfect. "Stay with me," she said, her voice stronger now, slipping into professional mode even as tears streamed down her face. "I know you're poisoned. I can see it. But I can help you. I can—" She stopped, looking around the alley wildly. Siwoo watched her think, watched the moment she made a decision. She pulled out a phone, cracked screen, cheap model, and dialed with shaking fingers. "Yobo?" she said in terrible Korean. "Yes, it's Ify. I need to use the clinic. Emergency. Life or death." Pause. "I know it's 2 a.m. I know. Please. Please, I'll work extra shifts. Siwoo couldn't hear the response, but he saw her face crumple with relief. "Kamsahamnida. Thank you. 10 minutes. She looked down at him. "I'm going to move you," she said, switching to English. "It's going to hurt like hell and you might die anyway. But staying here definitely kills you. So we're going. Understand?" Siwoo couldn't nod, but his fingers squeezed hers, barely, weakly. She understood. "Okay," she breathed. "Okay. Chineki, give me strength." What happened next was objectively impossible. This woman, maybe 5'6", slender despite her curves, exhausted from 3 jobs and running for her life, somehow got Han Siwoo, 6'2", and 180 pounds of muscle and expensive suit, onto her back in a fireman's carry. She shouldn't have been able to do it, but desperation made people superhuman. She staggered out of the gap between dumpsters, her legs shaking, her breath coming in sobs. Siwoo's vision swam, darkening at the edges. He could feel his heart arrhythmic in his chest, could feel the poison spreading, shutting down his organs one by one, but he could also feel her hands gripping his arm and leg, her shoulder digging into his stomach, her body heat burning through the cold, her determination. She walked, one step, another, her feet sliding in puddles, her breath ragged, her whole body trembling. "Not dying tonight," she muttered, her voice fierce despite the tears. "Neither of us. You hear me? Not tonight." Siwoo's eyes closed, but for the first time since his mother died, he didn't want them to. Ify didn't remember walking the 6 blocks to the clinic, didn't remember entering through the back door that Yobo, the old Korean pharmacist who let her use his supply room for undocumented patients, left unlocked, didn't remember laying the man on the exam table. She remembered her hands moving, remembered cutting away his shirt. Dior, definitely Dior. She'd ruined at least W5,000 worth of clothing. Remembered finding the stab wound, shallow and already clotting, almost irrelevant compared to the real problem. Remembered searching through the medicine cabinet with shaking hands. Poison. What kind? Symptoms suggested something neurotoxic, probably organophosphate-based, maybe with anticoagulant properties given the bleeding. She had minutes, maybe less. Her training took over completely. Activated charcoal? No. Too late for that. He'd already absorbed it. Atropine? Yes, if it was organophosphate. Pralidoxim? If she had it. Supportive care. Fluids, oxygen, hope. Ify's hands moved with precision her conscious mind couldn't match. IV line in his arm. Good veins, she noted absurdly. Atropine pushed. Normal saline wide open. Oxygen mask over his face. His heart rate on the monitor was chaos. 45 BPM. 120 BPM. 67 BPM. Skipping beats. Struggling. "Come on," she whispered, her hands on his chest, feeling his heart fight. "Come on, you stubborn bastard. Live." She didn't know why she cared, didn't know why this man, this stranger in a Dior suit who was probably Yakuza or worse, mattered. But he did. Maybe because he was dying in front of her and she had the skills to stop it. Maybe because she was so fucking tired of watching people die because of money, because of debt, because the world was cruel and unfair. Maybe because when he'd looked at her in that alley, his eyes had held something she hadn't seen in years. Recognition, not of her face, but of something deeper. Like he saw her, really saw her. The her buried under debt and fear and shame. Liv, she said again, her voice breaking. Please. The monitor beeped steadily. His heart rate stabilized at 78 BPM. His breathing deepened. Ify's legs gave out. She collapsed into the chair beside the exam table, her body shaking violently. Adrenaline crash, shock, terror catching up. She'd just saved the life of a man who was definitely criminal, definitely dangerous, definitely someone she should have left in that alley. And now he was alive in a clinic that wasn't legal, treated by a nurse who wasn't supposed to be working, with medicine that wasn't documented. If he died, she'd be blamed for murder. If he lived, he'd know her face. Either way, she was fucked. Ify put her head in her hands and finally let herself cry. She didn't see the man's eyes open, didn't see him turn his head slowly on the pillow, his dark gaze fixed on her hunched form, didn't see the way his expression changed. Something shifting behind those cold, lethal eyes. Something that hadn't existed 17 years ago. Something that looked almost like wonder. Han Si-woo stared at the woman crying beside him and thought, for the first time since his mother's death, I want to live. She'd fallen asleep. Si-woo didn't know when. Maybe an hour ago. Maybe less. His sense of time was still fucked from the poison. But at some point, her sobs had quieted. Her breathing had evened out, and her hand, which had been resting on his arm, monitoring his pulse, had gone slack. She slept sitting in an uncomfortable plastic chair, her head tilted at an angle that would give her neck pain, her body still covered in his blood. She hadn't left him, even after saving his life, even after the danger passed. Even though she had every reason to run, she'd stayed. Si-woo's mind, usually sharp as the knives he used to gut traitors, struggled to process this. People didn't stay with him. They obeyed him, feared him, used him, or died by him. But no one stayed voluntarily, not since his mother. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain shot through his side. The stab wound, minor compared to the poison but still present. His head swam with vertigo. The woman jerked awake instantly, nurse instincts kicking in. No, don't move, she said, her hands on his shoulders, gently pushing him back down. You were poisoned. Your nervous system is still recovering. Moving too fast could... Her eyes met his. She froze. Si-woo stared at her dark brown eyes, wide and startled, at the dried tear tracks on her face, at her full lips, slightly parted in shock, at the blood, his blood, covering her scrubs. You're awake, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Si-woo tried to speak. His throat was raw, his vocal cords still partially paralyzed. What came out was barely a rasp. You stayed. It wasn't what he meant to say. He meant to ask where he was, who she was, what she wanted. That's what the Serpent of Ice would ask. But apparently, the man who'd almost died in a puddle asked different questions. Her eyes filled with tears again. Of course I stayed, she said, her voice breaking. What kind of nurse would I be if I saved you just to leave you alone? Something in Si-woo's chest, that thing that had cracked open in the alley, split wider. Who? He rasped. Who are you? She hesitated. He saw the calculation in her eyes, the fear warring with something else. Honesty won. Ifunanya Okonkwo, she said quietly. Everyone calls me Ify. I'm a nurse, undocumented, working 3 jobs to pay off debt to traffickers who found me in Seoul 6 months ago. She laughed, a broken sound. I was running from them when I tripped over you. She'd told him everything, every detail that could destroy her. Just like that. Si-woo stared at her. Why? He managed. Why what? Why save me? Why stay? You could have left. Run. Ify looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked down at her hands, still stained with his blood. "Because someone has to give a damn," she said softly. "Everyone in my life who should have protected me, my fiancé, my family, the people I trusted, they all chose money over my life. They all chose easy over right." She looked back up at him, and her eyes were fierce through the tears. "I won't be that person, even if it kills me, even if you're dangerous, even if you're one of them." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "My mother died because no one cared enough to save her. I won't let someone else die in front of me if I have the power to stop it. I won't." Ninguém nunca tinha olhado para Han Si-woo e visto someone worth saving. They saw the serpent of ice, the monster, the killer. But this woman, this stranger who owed him nothing, who had every reason to hate men like him, had looked at him dying in an alley and seen a life worth risking her own for. Siwoo's hand moved. Slowly, weakly, still shaking from the poison. He reached for her face. She flinched, instinctive, automatic, a trauma response he recognized immediately. He stopped, his hand hovering inches from her cheek. "I won't hurt you," he rasped, the words costing him immense effort. Her eyes searched his face. Whatever she saw there made her shoulders relax slightly. She leaned forward, closing the distance, letting his palm rest against her cheek. Her skin was warm, soft, alive. "Thank you," Siwoo whispered. Ify's eyes widened, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "For what?" "For staying. For caring. For making me want to live when I'd given up years ago." But Siwoo's throat couldn't handle that many words, so he just said, "Everything." A tear rolled down her cheek, over his fingers. Outside the clinic, Seoul continued its indifferent existence. Rain fell. Neon signs flickered. Somewhere, people hunted and were hunted. But in that small room, two people who should have died, one from poison, one from debt, sat in silence, connected by blood and choice, and something neither could name. Ify didn't know the man whose life she'd saved was the most dangerous person in Korea. Siwoo didn't know the woman who'd saved him was being hunted by his own organization. Nenhum dos dois sabia that in 5 days, the men who'd chased Ify in that alley would return with more numbers and worse intentions. But for now, in this moment, they were just two people who'd chosen life when death would have been easier. And that would change everything. Ify woke to the sound of men speaking Korean in low, dangerous voices. Her eyes snapped open. The clinic. She'd fallen asleep again, stupid, reckless, and now there were at least 4 voices in the front room. Maybe more. She sat up too fast, her neck screaming in protest. The exam room was dark except for the glow of the monitor still tracking the man's, Siwoo's, she remembered. Vital signs. Steady. Strong. He was asleep, his chest rising and falling evenly. Alive because of her. Possibly about to get her killed. The voices grew louder. One of them was Yobo, the old pharmacist, speaking rapidly in stressed Korean. The others were deeper, colder. Ify's hand went instinctively to her pocket. The vegetable peeler was still there, pathetic and useless. The door to the exam room opened. A man stepped through, tall, broad, wearing all black tactical gear. He had a gun. Ify's breath stopped. The man's eyes went immediately to the exam table, to Siwoo sleeping there. His entire body language changed, from predatory to something like relief mixed with rage. He barked something in Korean that sounded like a question. If he didn't move, didn't breathe. The man's eyes shifted to her. He took in her blood-stained scrubs, her defensive posture, the way her body was positioned between him and Siwoo. He lowered his gun slightly and spoke again, this time in heavily accented English. "You, doctor?" "Nurse," Ify said, her voice steadier than she felt. "He live?" "Yes." The man's shoulders dropped. He turned and called something to the others. 3 more men entered, all armed, all wearing similar tactical gear, all moving with the efficient precision of soldiers. Or criminals. One of them approached the exam table. Ify stepped in front of him without thinking. He needs rest, she said firmly, her nurse voice activating. He was poisoned. His nervous system is still recovering. If you move him now, he could have a stroke or cardiac arrest. The man stared at her like she'd grown a second head. Behind her, a raspy voice spoke in Korean, then English. Do what she says. Ify spun around. Siwoo was awake, his dark eyes alert despite the pallor of his skin. He looked at his men, then at her, then back to his men. He said something in rapid Korean. The tone was unmistakable. Command. The men hesitated, then nodded. The one who'd spoken English turned to Ify. How long? Before we move? Ify looked at Siwoo's monitor, at his vitals. Her clinical brain calculated. Minimum 6 hours, ideally 24. 6 hours? Siwoo rasped. We move in 6 hours. It wasn't a question. The English-speaking man nodded. Where, Hyungnim? Siwoo's eyes stayed on Ify. Home, and she comes with us. The room went silent. Ify's stomach dropped. What? She breathed. You saved my life, Siwoo said, his voice gaining strength with each word. You know my face. You know I was vulnerable. His dark eyes bored into hers. You're not safe out there anymore. My enemies will find you. Your enemies already are finding you. He paused. You come with me. I protect you. It wasn't an invitation. It was a sentence. No, Ify said immediately, her heart racing. No, I'm not going anywhere with you. I don't even know who you are. One of the men made a sound, maybe a laugh, maybe a cough. Siwoo's expression didn't change. Han Siwoo, leader of the Golden Serpent, the largest criminal syndicate in South Korea. He said it like he was introducing himself at a business meeting. Ify's blood turned to ice, mafia. She'd saved a mafia boss. Then you definitely don't need me, she said, forcing her voice to stay calm. You have resources, doctors, protection. I'm nobody. Let me go. No. The word was soft, final. Ify felt panic rising in her chest. The old panic. The one from Lagos, from the container, from the hands grabbing her in the dark. You can't just, I'm not your property. Her voice rose. I saved your life. That doesn't give you the right to. You're being hunted, Siwoo interrupted, his voice still rough but gaining authority. By traffickers, by debt collectors, by people who will do worse than kill you. He sat up slowly, ignoring his men's protests, his eyes never leaving hers. I am offering protection, safety, a place where no one will touch you without consequences. A prison, Ify snapped. A sanctuary. With what price? Ify demanded. Men like you don't do anything for free. What do you want from me? For a moment, just a moment, something flickered across Siwoo's face. Hurt, maybe, or recognition. Nothing you don't want to give, he said quietly. The English-speaking guard shifted uncomfortably. One of the others whispered something in Korean that sounded like disbelief. Ify laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. Right. Because I should totally trust the mafia boss who just told me I'm his prisoner, his protected guest. She crossed her arms. What happens when you decide I know too much? When I become inconvenient? Siwoo's jaw tightened. I don't hurt women, he said, his voice hard. Ever. It's the one rule I never break. Something in his tone made Ify pause. There was history there, pain, but she'd fallen for men's promises before. I want to leave, she said firmly. Now. I won't tell anyone what I saw. I'll disappear. You'll never see me again. You'll be dead in a week. The English-speaking guard nodded. The men chasing you tonight? They work for Park Dae-jung. He controls Itaewon's underground. If Hyungnim protects you, Park can't touch you. If you leave, he shrugged. Park doesn't forgive debts. Ify's hands clenched into fists. Her nails dug into her palms. She was trapped. Again. Always fucking trapped. How long? She asked, her voice hollow. How long what? Siwoo asked. How long am I your prisoner? Until the threat is eliminated. Which means? Siwoo's expression was unreadable. However long it takes. Ify closed her eyes, felt tears burning behind her lids but refused to let them fall. Not in front of these men. Not again. Can I get my things? She asked quietly. From my apartment? We already have them, the English-speaking guard said. We sent men an hour ago. Of course they did. Ify opened her eyes and looked at Siwoo. Really looked at him. At the man she'd saved. The man who was now taking her freedom. I hate you, she said clearly. Something shifted in his expression. Pain. Definitely pain this time. I know, he said softly. But you'll be alive to hate me. That's what matters. Siwoo's home was a penthouse in Hanam-dong that probably cost more than Ify would make in 10 lifetimes. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Han River. Furniture that looked like art installations. A kitchen bigger than her entire apartment. Everything in blacks, whites, and grays. Beautiful and cold and utterly soulless. Like the man who owned it. They'd moved him in a private ambulance. Ify monitoring his vitals the entire way, even though she wanted to let him crash just to escape. Professional obligation won over personal rage. Now, 6 hours after arriving, Siwoo was installed in a master bedroom that had its own medical equipment. IV stand, monitors, even oxygen. Apparently, mafia bosses had backup hospital rooms. Rest, Ify had told him after checking his vitals again. Your heart rhythm is still irregular. Any stress could trigger arrhythmia. Are you always this bossy with patients? Siwoo had asked, and there'd been something almost like amusement in his voice. Only the ones who kidnap me. The amusement had died. Now Ify stood in what they designated as her room. A guest suite bigger than any apartment she'd ever lived in, with a private bathroom and a bed that looked like a cloud. She hated it. Hated the luxury purchased with blood money. Hated that it was beautiful. Hated that her traitorous body felt relief at being somewhere safe for the first time in years. Her things, her pathetic collection of clothes, her stolen medical textbooks, her mother's head wrap, sat in neat boxes on the bed. They'd packed her entire life like she was moving, not being imprisoned. Ify sat down hard on the bed and finally let herself cry, not sobbing. Just silent tears running down her face while her body shook with exhaustion and terror and rage. A soft knock on the door. Go away, Ify called, not caring who it was. The door opened anyway. The English-speaking guard stepped in. She'd learned his name was Junho. He carried a tray with food and tea. Hyungnim says you need to eat, Junho said, setting the tray on the desk. You've been working for 18 hours. Tell Hyungnim I'm not hungry. Tell him yourself. He's monitoring your room on security cameras. Ify's head snapped up. What? Junho pointed to a small camera in the corner of the ceiling. Rage exploded through Ify's exhaustion. She stood up, walked directly to the camera, and stared into it. Turn it off. Silence. Then, through a speaker she hadn't noticed, Siwoo's raspy voice. No, turn it off. You could hurt yourself. I need to monitor. I'm not your fucking patient, Ify screamed at the camera. I'm a prisoner. At least have the decency to admit it. You don't get to pretend this is for my safety while you spy on me. Silence. Then, the camera in your bedroom and bathroom will be disabled. The one in the main room stays. It wasn't what she'd demanded, but it was something. Fine, Ify spat. Eat, Siwoo added. Please. That please did something to her rage. Didn't extinguish it, but complicated it. Junho cleared his throat. For what it's worth, Hyungnim never brings anyone here. This penthouse is his sanctuary. The fact that he's letting you stay means something. It means I'm a liability he's containing. Junho shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe he sees you differently. I don't care how he sees me. I want to leave. Can't let you do that. Junho headed for the door, then paused. But for what it's worth. I've worked for Hyungnim for 8 years. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you in that clinic. Like you were something precious. He left before Ify could respond. She stood alone in her gilded cage, staring at the food she didn't want, in the room she didn't choose, protected by the man who terrified her. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, was the tiny, traitorous voice in the back of her mind whispering, At least here, you're not running. 3 days passed in surreal luxury. Ify spent most of her time in her room, reading her medical textbooks, ignoring the staff who brought meals, avoiding Saiwoo even though she had to check on him twice daily. His recovery was remarkable. By day 2, his vitals were normal. By day 3, he was walking around, working from his home office like nothing had happened. The poison that should have killed him was just an inconvenience. Meanwhile, Ify felt like she was dying by inches. The penthouse was beautiful and suffocating. She had everything except freedom. Food appeared before she knew she was hungry. Clothes in her size, expensive, beautiful, showed up in her closet. Staff bowed to her like she was someone important instead of a prisoner. It was the most comfortable cage she'd ever been in, which made it worse somehow. On the 4th day, Ify broke. She was checking Saiwoo's vitals in his office. Blood pressure, heart rate, the routine she'd established, when she noticed something on his computer screen. A file, with her name on it. "What is that?" she asked, her voice sharp. Saiwoo didn't flinch. "Information about your debt, the traffickers, the people hunting you." "You're investigating me?" "I'm protecting you. That requires information." Ify's hands clenched around the stethoscope. "You have no right." "I have every right. You're under my protection now." "I never asked for your protection." "You got it anyway." Siwoo's eyes met hers, calm and cold. "Would you prefer I let them find you? Let them take you back?" Ify's stomach turned. The container in Lagos, the hands, the darkness. "That's not fair," she whispered. "Nothing about this is fair," Saiwoo agreed. "But it's reality. Your debt is W42,000 to a Nigerian trafficking operation that has connections to Park Dae-jung's organization here in Seoul. They want you back, Ify, not for the money, for what you represent, an escaped asset." "Don't call me that." "It's what they call you." Siwoo's voice was gentle now, which was somehow worse. "I'm not saying it to hurt you. I'm saying it so you understand what we're dealing with." "We?" Ify laughed bitterly. "There is no we. You're my jailer." Siwoo stood up slowly. He was wearing a black button-down shirt, casual but still expensive, and despite the poison 4 days ago, he moved with lethal grace. He took a step toward her. Ify stepped back instinctively. Siwoo stopped immediately, his expression shifting to something like guilt. "I told you," he said quietly. "I won't hurt you. I won't touch you without permission." "You already hurt me," Ify said, her voice shaking. "By taking my choice. By trapping me here. Would you have come if I'd asked nicely?" "No." "Exactly." Siwoo ran a hand through his black hair, frustration showing for the first time. "I'm not good at this, at caring whether someone lives or dies. It's been 17 years since He cut himself off. "You saved my life. That means something to me. It means I keep you alive even if you hate me for it." "Very noble," Ify said sarcastically. "The criminal with a conscience." Siwoo's eyes flashed, something dark and painful. "My mother was raped and murdered when I was 16, he said, his voice flat, "by men who thought women were property. I watched it happen, couldn't stop it." He met her eyes. "I swore that day that I would never let another woman suffer if I had the power to prevent it. That's not nobility. That's penance." Ify's anger stuttered. Not died. The rage was still there. But it collided with something else. Recognition. Shared pain. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. "That's horrible. But it doesn't give you the right to imprison me to ease your guilt." "No," Siwoo agreed. "It doesn't. But I'm doing it anyway." At least he was honest. "How long?" Ify asked. "Really? How long until you let me go?" Siwoo was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," he finally said. "The trafficking network is extensive. Park Dae-jung has political protection. Taking them down will require time, strategy, and I'm bait," Ify finished. "You're using me to draw them out." "No." Siwoo's voice was sharp. "You're protected, untouchable. They want you, yes, but they won't get you. That's the point. Unless you decide I'm more useful to you as bait than as a burden." Siwoo's jaw tightened. He took another step toward her, not threatening, but intent. Ify's back hit the desk. Nowhere to go. Siwoo stopped 2 feet away, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle. Close enough that she could see the faint scar on his jawline. Close enough that her body tensed with old panic. But he didn't reach for her. Just stood there, his dark eyes searching her face. "I know you don't trust me," he said quietly. "I know you have every reason not to, but I need you to hear this. I will never use you as bait. I will never put you in danger deliberately. And I will never, ever force you to do anything you don't choose. Except stay here." "Except that," he admitted. "Because the alternative is your death, and He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his face. "I can't let that happen. Not after you." He didn't finish. Ify stared at him, at this man who was simultaneously her savior and her captor, this criminal with rules. This killer who apparently had a line he wouldn't cross. "You're a walking contradiction," she said softly. "I know." They stood in silence, 2 feet and a universe of trauma between them. Then Ify made a decision. She reached out slowly, so slowly, and placed her hand on his chest. Over his heart. Siwoo froze. She could feel his heartbeat under her palm. Strong, steady, alive because she'd saved him. "If I'm staying," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "then I need rules." "What rules?" "1. I need work. Real work. I'm a nurse. Let me help your people. You're injured. I can't sit in that room going insane." Siwoo nodded slowly. "Agreed. 2. No more cameras. None. I need privacy. The security?" "I said no cameras." Her voice was firm. "You want to protect me? Fine. But not by watching me sleep." Siwoo's expression was conflicted, but he finally nodded. "Agreed. But Jun-ho stays posted outside your door at night." "Fine." Ify took a breath. 3. You don't touch me without asking. Ever. Even if it's innocent. Even if you think it's okay. You ask first. Something in Siwoo's eyes softened. "Agreed," he said quietly. "And Ify? If you ever want me to stay away completely, if my presence makes you uncomfortable, tell me. I'll keep my distance." Ningame nunca tinha given Ifunanya o Konkwo autonomy before. Especially not men with power over her. Her hand was still on his chest. She could feel his heart rate increase slightly. She pulled her hand back. Siwoo caught her wrist, gently, so gently. And Ify's panic spiked. But then he let go immediately, his expression horrified. "Forgive me," he said, stepping back. I forgot." "It's okay," Ify said, even though her heart was racing. "You let go. That matters." They stared at each other. "I'm trying to be better," Siwoo said quietly. "I don't know if I can be good, but I can try to be better." Ify's anger didn't disappear, but it shifted, became something more complex. "I still hate you for trapping me here," she said. "I know. But I don't hate you for keeping me alive." Siwoo's expression was unreadable, but his voice, when he spoke, was rough with emotion. "That's more than I deserve." He left the office, leaving Ify alone with her confusion and her complicated feelings, and the warmth still lingering on her palm where she'd touched his heart. Outside the windows, Seoul glittered like broken glass. And somewhere in the city, men who thought they owned Ifunanya Okonkwo were planning how to take her back. But in this moment, in this gilded cage with this contradictory man, Ify felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Not safe, not yet, but protected. And that was terrifying in an entirely different way. 2 weeks into her captivity, Ify finally felt like she could breathe. Siwoo had kept his word about the work. She'd been treating his people, men with knife wounds, bullet grazes, broken bones they couldn't take to hospitals. At first, they'd been suspicious of her, this African woman in their boss's penthouse. But after she'd saved a lieutenant from bleeding out after a botched collection, they'd started calling her Wisanim, an honorific that meant something like healer. It felt good to be useful again, to be more than a burden or property. Siwoo mostly kept his distance, appearing only when she needed medical supplies or when Junho reported something concerning. When they did interact, he maintained careful space between them, never touching, always asking before entering her personal areas. It should have been unsettling, this careful choreography of trauma and respect from a man who killed for a living. Instead, it was confusing, because Ifunanya Okonkwo was starting to see cracks in the monster. Like the way Siwoo had donated $100,000 to a women's shelter after learning they'd had their funding cut, or how he'd ordered his men to leave children and women out of collections, even if it meant losing money, or the way he'd quietly paid off the medical debt of a lieutenant's sister dying of cancer. The Serpent of Ice had rules, strange, brutal rules, but rules that protected the vulnerable. It didn't make him good, but it made him something other than pure evil. And that terrified Ify almost as much as her captivity had. She was treating a young enforcer's dislocated shoulder in the penthouse's makeshift medical room when Junho burst through the door, his face pale. "Wisa Nim, you need to come now." The tone sent ice through Ify's veins. She'd heard that tone in emergency rooms. It meant life or death. What happened? "Hyungnim, there's been an attempt." Ify's heart stopped. "Where is he?" "Main office. He's conscious, but..." Ify was already moving, her medical bag in hand. She found Siwoo in his office, sitting in his desk chair with his jacket removed and his white shirt soaked in blood. Junho and 3 other men surrounded him, guns drawn, facing outward. Siwoo looked up when she entered. His face was pale, his jaw tight with pain, but his eyes were alert. "It's not as bad as it looks," he said. Ify pushed past the guards and dropped to her knees beside him, her hands already assessing. "Gunshot?" she asked, finding the wound on his right side, just below the ribs. "Through and through. Missed the kidney." "How do you know?" "This isn't my first time being shot." Of course it wasn't. Ify's hands moved on autopilot. Gauze, pressure, checking for arterial bleed. The wound was clean, the bleeding already slowing. He was right. It had missed major organs, but he'd been shot. Again. In his own building. "Who?" she asked while she worked. "Park Dae-jung's people." Siwoo's voice was tight with pain and rage. "They got past security. Someone let them in." Traitor. There was a traitor in his organization. "I need to clean this properly," Ify said. "Can you walk to the medical room?" "I can walk to hell if necessary." Despite everything, Ify almost smiled. With Junho's help, they got Siwoo to the medical room. Ify worked quickly, cleaning the wound, checking for fragments, stitching. Siwoo barely flinched, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. "Pain medication," she offered. "No, need to stay sharp." "You've been shot. And someone in my organization tried to kill me. I don't have the luxury of being unconscious." Ify threaded another suture. "Your mother would want you to take care of yourself." Siwoo's eyes snapped to hers. She'd surprised him and herself with the personal comment. "How do you know what my mother would want?" he asked quietly. "Because she raised a son who protects women and children even though it costs him money and power. That's not nothing. That's love that survived death." Something in Siwoo's expression cracked. "She would have liked you," he said softly. "She always said the strongest people are the ones who choose kindness despite the world's cruelty." Ify's hands stilled on the suture. "I'm not kind," she said. "I'm surviving. Maybe they're the same thing." Before Ify could respond, Junho entered, his face grim. "Hyungnim, we found the traitor." Siwoo sat up immediately, ignoring Ify's protest. "Who?" "Kim Tae-hyun, one of the door guards. He's been feeding Park information for 3 months. Including schedules, security codes, and..." Junho hesitated. "And information about Wisa Nim." Ify's blood ran cold. "What information?" Siwoo's voice was lethal. "Her location. Her routine. When she's alone." Junho met Ify's eyes. "Park knows you're here. He's planning an extraction." The room went silent except for Ify's harsh breathing. "When?" Siwoo asked. "We don't know. Kim killed himself before we could get details. But Park has been mobilizing his people. It's coming soon." Siwoo stood, his movement deliberate despite the fresh stitches in his side. Double security on this floor. No one enters without my direct authorization. Move Ify to the panic room until— No, Ify interrupted. Everyone stared at her. I'm not hiding in a panic room while you fight my battles, she said firmly. I'm staying here, working, helping. Ify, Siwoo began. Don't. She stood, meeting his eyes. I've spent 3 years running and hiding. I'm done. If they're coming for me, I want to see them coming. They'll kill you. Then I die fighting instead of cowering. Her voice hardened. You don't get to lock me up again. Not even for my own safety. That was the deal. Siwoo looked like he wanted to argue. His jaw worked, his hands clenched. Then he exhaled slowly. Fine, but Junho doesn't leave your side, ever. And you wear a panic button. He pulled a small device from his desk drawer. Press this, and every armed man in this building comes running. Ify took the device. It was surprisingly light, a small black button on a chain. Okay, she said. Okay, Siwoo echoed, though his expression said it was anything but. The attack came 3 days later. Ify was in her room, reading a medical journal, when the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, dim red bulbs that turned everything into a horror movie. Junho burst through her door, gun drawn. We're under attack. 12 hostiles, maybe more. They cut the power and are coming up through the parking garage. Ify's panic button was already in her hand. Where's Siwoo? Fighting. He ordered me to secure you in the panic room. I told him I'm not. You Isa Nim. Junho's voice was sharp. Please, he'll die protecting you if you're exposed. The panic room has reinforced steel and its own air supply. You'll be safe until we eliminate the threat. Ify hesitated. She wanted to fight, to be useful. But Junho was right. Siwoo would sacrifice himself for her, and his death would be on her conscience. Fine. But I'm taking medical supplies. People are going to need treatment when this is over. Junho nodded. Quickly. They moved through the darkened penthouse, Junho leading with his gun raised. Ify's medical bag was heavy on her shoulder, her heart pounding in her ears. They were almost to the panic room when a figure stepped out of the shadows. Not one of Siwoo's men. This one wore tactical gear marked with a red serpent, Park Dae-jung's symbol. Junho fired. The man went down, but 3 more appeared behind him. Run! Junho shouted, returning fire. Ify ran. She didn't know the penthouse layout well enough. Took a wrong turn, ended up in an unfamiliar hallway. Behind her, gunshots echoed, shouting in Korean, glass breaking. She pressed the panic button. Nothing happened. Either it was broken or the signal was jammed. Ify ducked into a room, Siwoo's bedroom, she realized. She'd never been inside before. It was stark and minimal, with floor-to-ceiling windows showing the Seoul night, beautiful and exposed. She heard footsteps in the hallway. Ify grabbed the only weapon she could find, a letter opener from Siwoo's nightstand. It was sharp and thin and completely inadequate. The door opened. A man entered. Park's colors, tactical gear, a gun in his hand. He saw her immediately. There you are, he said in English with a thick Korean accent. Park Nim has been looking for you. I'm not going anywhere with you, Ify said, her voice steady despite her terror. The man smiled. Not your choice. He moved toward her. Ify raised the letter opener. I'll fight you. Good. Park likes them feisty. More fun to break. Rage exploded through Ify's fear. She'd heard that tone before. In Lagos, in the container. From men who thought her body was their property. Never again. She lunged, the letter opener aimed at his throat. He was faster. Caught her wrist, twisted. The opener clattered to the floor. His other hand grabbed her throat, slamming her against the wall. Stupid bitch, he hissed. Ify couldn't breathe. Black spots danced in her vision. Her hands clawed at his grip uselessly. This was how she died. Choking in a criminal's bedroom in a foreign city. At least she'd fought. Then the man's grip vanished. Ify collapsed, gasping, her throat on fire. When her vision cleared, she saw why. Han Si-woo stood over the man's body. The man was still alive. Barely. His throat cut from ear to ear with surgical precision. But Si-woo wasn't looking at him. He was looking at Ify, and his expression was murder. "Are you hurt?" His voice was eerily calm. No, Ify managed, her voice raw. Si-woo nodded once. Then he turned to the dying man on the floor. "Where's Park?" he asked in English. The man gurgled something, defiant, loyal. Si-woo knelt beside him, placed his hand over the man's throat wound. "You have 2 minutes before you bleed out," he said conversationally. "Tell me where Park is, and I make it quick. Stay silent, and I keep you conscious while you drown in your own blood." The man's eyes widened. He tried to speak, but only blood came out. Si-woo waited. Ify watched, horrified and transfixed. With 30 seconds left, the man broke, gestured weakly toward the window, mouthed something. Si-woo leaned in, listened, then nodded. "Thank you," he said. Then he covered the man's nose and mouth until the struggling stopped. It was mercy. Brutal, efficient mercy. When it was done, Si-woo stood and turned to Ify. "Park is in the building, 20th floor. He thinks he's secured the lower levels." Si-woo's dark eyes burned. "He's wrong." "Si-woo," Ify started. "Stay here. Jun-ho will—" "He's dead," Ify whispered. "I saw him fall. 3 of Park's men." Something in Si-woo's expression went absolutely cold. "Then no one is left to stop me," he said quietly. He moved toward the door. "Wait," Ify called. Si-woo paused. "Your stitches. They'll tear if you fight." "I don't care." "I care," Ify said, surprising herself with the truth of it. Si-woo looked at her for a long moment. Then he crossed back to her, moving with that lethal grace despite his injury. He stopped close, closer than he'd been since the office. Close enough that she could see the blood splattered on his face, the absolute fury in his eyes. "Do you know what they would have done to you?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Park's men. If I hadn't come—" Ify's hand went unconsciously to her throat, to the bruises already forming. "Yes," she whispered. "I know. I will destroy everyone who tried to take you," Si-woo said. And it wasn't a promise. It was a fact. Every single one, until Park and his entire organization are ash. "That's not justice," Ify said softly. "That's revenge. I don't care about the difference." Si-woo raised his hand slowly, so slowly, giving her time to refuse. She didn't. His palm cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing gently over the bruises on her throat. "They touched you," he said, his voice raw. "They hurt you. In my home. Under my protection." Algo dentro del quebró when he saw her choking. She could see it in his eyes. The last piece of ice around his heart shattering. "I'm okay," Ify said, her hand covering his on her cheek. "You're not," Si-woo said, "but you will be, because I'm going to end this. Tonight." He pulled away, heading for the door again. "Si-woo," Ify called. He turned back. "Come back alive," she said. Please. For the first time since his mother's death, Han Si-woo had a reason to survive beyond vengeance. "I will," he promised. Then he was gone, leaving Ify alone with a corpse, and the terrifying realization that she cared desperately whether the Serpent of Ice lived or died. The sounds of fighting echoed through the penthouse for 20 minutes. Gunshots, shouting, something that might have been an explosion, then silence. Ify waited in Si-woo's bedroom, the panic button useless in her hand, her medical bag ready. When the door opened, she tensed. Si-woo stepped through. He was covered in blood, his own and others. His white shirt was torn, his stitches had indeed ripped, and there was a new cut across his forehead. But he was alive. "It's done," he said simply. "Park is dead. His lieutenants are dead. The organization is scattered." "How many?" Ify asked. "How many what? How many did you kill?" Si-woo met her eyes. 17. 17 men, dead by his hands, in less than half an hour. Ify should have been horrified. Instead, she felt something darker, something that whispered, "He did it for you." "You're bleeding," she said, her nurse voice steady. "I've had worse." "That doesn't mean you don't need treatment." She gestured to the bed. "Sit." Siwoo obeyed, wincing as he lowered himself. Ify worked in silence, cleaning the blood, assessing the damage. His stitches had torn completely. The wound was bleeding freely again. "This is going to hurt," she warned. "Everything hurts already." She started resuturing. Siwoo didn't make a sound, but she felt his muscles tense under her hands. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why what? Why does it matter so much? Me? My safety? You barely know me." Siwoo was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Because you're the first person in 17 years who looked at me and didn't see death." Ify's hand stilled. "When I woke up in that clinic," Siwoo continued, his voice rough, "and you were crying over me, praying for me to live, I realized I'd forgotten what it felt like to matter to someone, to be more than a weapon or a monster." He looked up at her, his dark eyes vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. "You made me want to be human again," he said, "even if I don't know how anymore." Ify's heart was pounding. She finished the last stitch with trembling hands. "You kept your promise," she said softly, "about not touching me without permission, about respecting my autonomy, even when it would have been easier not to." She met his eyes. "That's more human than you think. It's the bare minimum. The world doesn't even give women that most of the time." Ify's voice hardened. "So yes, it matters. You matter." The air between them shifted, charged with something Ify didn't want to name. Siwoo reached up slowly, his hand hovering near her face. "May I?" he asked. It was the first time he'd asked to touch her since the office. Ify nodded. His palm cupped her cheek, warm and solid and safe. "Thank you," he said, "for saving my life, for staying, for not running when you saw what I am." "I did run," Ify pointed out, "that first night. But you came back. I was captured. You stayed anyway." Ify couldn't argue with that. She leaned into his touch, just slightly, surprising herself. Siwoo's thumb brushed her cheekbone, gentle as prayer. "If you want to leave now," he said quietly, "I'll let you go. The threat is eliminated. You're free." Ify's breath caught. Free. She could walk out right now, go back to her life. Except, what life? Her apartment was compromised. Her jobs were through illegal channels. She had nowhere to go. And more than that, a truth she didn't want to acknowledge. She didn't want to leave. Not him. Not yet. "I'll stay," she heard herself say, "until I figure out what's next." Relief flooded Siwoo's expression. "Okay," he said softly. "Okay," she echoed. They sat in silence, his hand on her face, her hands still resting on his injured side. Two people who'd chosen each other in the worst possible circumstances, and neither knew if it would save them or destroy them. But for tonight, they were both alive. And that was enough. The aftermath of the attack changed something fundamental between them. Ify stayed, not because she had to anymore. Siwoo had meant it when he said she was free to go, but because she chose to. That choice terrified her almost as much as captivity had. She told herself it was practical. She had nowhere else to go. Her apartment had been raided by Park's remaining men. Her illegal work connections were compromised. Staying in Siwoo's penthouse made strategic sense. But late at night, when she couldn't sleep, Ify admitted the truth to herself. She was falling for the serpent of ice, and that was the most dangerous thing she'd ever done. Siwoo recovered from his injuries with frustrating speed. Within a week, he was back to running his organization, though Ify noticed he spent more time working from the penthouse than before. More time where she could find him if she needed. More time where he could protect her. They'd fallen into a strange routine. Breakfast together in comfortable silence. Her treating his people during the day while he handled business. Evenings where they'd sit in the living room reading, her medical journals, him contracts and reports, not speaking but present. It felt dangerously close to domestic. 3 weeks after the attack, Ify woke from a nightmare screaming. The container in Lagos, hands grabbing her, the smell of rust and fear. She sat up gasping, her heart hammering, sweat soaking through her shirt. A knock on her door, urgent but controlled. "Ify?" Siwoo's voice. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she managed, her voice shaking. "Just a nightmare." Silence. Then, "May I come in?" Ify should have said no, should have maintained distance, but her room felt too small, the walls closing in, and Siwoo's voice was an anchor to reality. "Yes." The door opened. Siwoo entered wearing black sleep pants and a t-shirt, the most casual she'd ever seen him. His hair was mussed, his eyes alert despite the late hour. He stopped just inside the door, maintaining respectful distance. "The container?" he asked quietly. Ify's breath hitched. "How did you know?" "I read your file. The trafficking case. What they did to you in Lagos." His jaw tightened. "I'm sorry for all of it. It's not your fault. Parts of it are." Siwoo moved to the chair by her window but didn't sit, waiting for permission. "May I?" Ify nodded. He sat, his dark eyes reflecting the city lights outside. "The trafficking operation that took you was connected to my organization," he said quietly. "Before my time as leader, but still under the Golden Serpent banner. When I took over at 22, I found records of dozens of operations like yours. Women and children moved like cargo." Ify's stomach turned. "I shut them all down," Siwoo continued. "Made it a death penalty offense within my syndicate to traffic humans. But I couldn't undo what had already been done." He met her eyes. "I couldn't save you then, but I can protect you now." "You already saved me," Ify said softly. "From Park, from debt, from running. You saved yourself first, in that alley. You could have kept running, but you stopped to help a dying stranger." Siwoo's voice held something like wonder. "That takes more courage than anything I've ever done." Courage or stupidity? Both, maybe. A ghost of a smile crossed his face, then it faded. "Can I tell you something? Something I've never told anyone?" Ify's heart raced. "Yes." Siwoo was quiet for a long moment, staring out at Seoul's lights. "The night my mother died," he finally said, his voice raw. "I tried to stop them. The men who—" He cut himself off, jaw clenching. "I was 16, thought I was strong. I fought. They beat me unconscious. When I woke up, she was gone, destroyed, and I was alive." Tears burned Ify's eyes. "I wanted to die," Siwoo continued. "Tried, actually. Slit my wrists in the bathroom 3 days after her funeral. My father found me, had me patched up, told me weakness was pathetic. He laughed, bitter and broken. So I became strong, became exactly what he wanted, cold, lethal, efficient." "You survived," Ify said. "That's not weakness." "I stopped living," Siwoo corrected. "There's a difference. For 17 years, I was just existing, moving through days without feeling anything. It was easier that way." He looked at her then, and his eyes were devastated. "Until you," he whispered. "Until I woke up in that clinic and you were crying over me like my life meant something, like I was worth saving." "Algo dentro y funanya." Okonkwo's chest cracked wide open. "You are worth saving," she said, her voice fierce. "You're more than what was done to you, more than the violence you've committed." "Am I?" Siwoo's voice was barely audible. "I've killed 43 people, Ify. 43. Most of them deserved it, but not all. Some were just in the way. Some were debts to be paid." He closed his eyes. "How do you look at me knowing that?" Ify stood from the bed and crossed to him, knelt in front of his chair so they were eye level. "The same way you look at me knowing I was trafficked," she said quietly. "The same way you look at me knowing I carry trauma that makes me flinch at touch. The same way you look at me knowing I've done things I'm not proud of to survive." She reached out slowly, giving him time to refuse, and placed her hand over his heart. "You see the person I am now," she continued. "Not just what happened to me. I'm trying to do the same for you." Siwoo's hand covered hers on his chest. His eyes opened and they were wet. "I don't know how to be good," he said hoarsely. "I don't know if I ever was. But when I'm with you, I want to try." "Then try," Ify said simply. They stared at each other, two broken people choosing to see past the damage. I care about you, Saiwoo admitted, his voice raw with vulnerability. More than I should. More than is wise. You could destroy me with what you know about me. I could say the same about you. It's not the same. I have power, resources. You have you, Ify interrupted. I have you. However twisted this situation is, however wrong the circumstances, you've been more honest and respectful with me than any man I've ever known. The bar is underground, apparently. Despite everything, Ify laughed. Siwoo's expression softened at the sound. I like your laugh, he said quietly. It's the first sound that's made me happy since my mother sang to me. Ify's breath caught. The air between them shifted, charged with something inevitable. Siwoo, she whispered. Yes? May I touch you? Not as a nurse, just as me? Siwoo's eyes widened. You don't have to. I want to, Ify said. If you want it too. Ify, His voice broke. Yes, please, yes. She raised her other hand slowly and cupped his face, felt his sharp jawline, the slight stubble, the warmth of his skin. He leaned into her touch like a man starved for affection. You're warm, she said softly. You make me warm, he replied. Everything else is cold. Ify's thumb brushed his cheekbone, wiping away a tear she didn't think he knew had fallen. I think I'm falling for you, she admitted, the words terrifying and true. I don't know if that's real or just trauma bonding or… Saiwoo's hand came up to cup her face, mirroring her gesture. I don't care what it's called, he said intently. I just know that when I thought you might die, something in me broke. When I saw that man's hands on your throat, his jaw clenched. I would burn this entire city to keep you safe. That's not healthy, Ify said, but her voice was soft. Nothing about us is healthy, but it's ours. They stared at each other, faces inches apart, both afraid to cross the final distance. Then an alarm blared through the penthouse. They jerked apart. Siwoo was on his feet instantly, his entire demeanor shifting from vulnerable to lethal. What? Ify started. Breach, Siwoo said shortly. Someone got past perimeter security. The door burst open. One of Saiwoo's lieutenants, Kijun. Ify had treated his knife wound last week. Hyungnim, we have a situation. Police, SWAT team. They have a warrant for your arrest. Ify's heart stopped. On what charges? Siwoo asked calmly, though his hand had gone to the gun at his back. 17 counts of murder, from Park's organization. Kijun's face was grim. Someone tipped them, gave them evidence, bodies, forensics. Traitor. Again. How long do I have? Minutes. They're breaching the lobby now. Siwoo turned to Ify, his expression torn. There's an escape route, he said rapidly. Underground tunnel to a safe house in Gangnam. Kijun will take you. What about you? I'll surrender. Buy you time. No. Ify stood, her voice firm. I'm not leaving you to… Ify, please. Siwoo crossed to her, grabbed her shoulders, then immediately let go, remembering. Sorry, but listen, if they take me, I'll be executed. South Korea still has the death penalty for organized crime leaders. This is the end. Then we run together. They'll hunt you as an accessory. You'll never be free. I don't care. I do. Siwoo's voice cracked. I care. You deserve a life beyond this. Beyond me. Ify stared at him, this man who'd kidnapped her, protected her, respected her, broken her heart open. What if I don't want a life without you? She whispered. Siwoo's eyes went wide, devastated, hopeful. Ify, I choose you, she said fiercely. However fucked up that is. However wrong, I choose you. The sound of boots thundering upstairs. 30 seconds, Kijun shouted. Siwoo looked at Ify like she was the sun, and he'd lived in darkness his whole life. Then he pulled her close, not grabbing, giving her space to refuse. She didn't. Forgive me. He breathed against her lips. For what? For making you care. Then Han Siwoo kissed Ifunanya Okonkwo, like it was the last thing he'd ever do. His lips were soft and desperate and reverent. His hands cupped her face like she was precious. He tasted like regret and hope and goodbye. Ify kissed him back, pouring everything she couldn't say into it. Her fear, her hope, her ridiculous, impossible love for this broken, dangerous man. When they broke apart, both were crying. "Run," Siwoo whispered. "Please, live. Be happy. Come with me. I can't. If I run, they'll never stop hunting. But if I surrender—" He gave her a broken smile. "Maybe I can buy you freedom." The door exploded inward. SWAT team, guns raised, shouting in Korean. Ki-jun grabbed Ife's arm, pulling her toward a hidden panel in the wall. "No!" Ife screamed, fighting. "Siwoo!" Siwoo raised his hands, surrendering peacefully, his eyes never leaving hers. "I love you," he mouthed. The words hit Ife like bullets. "I love you too," she sobbed. Then Ki-jun pulled her through the panel, and it slammed shut. And the last thing Ife saw was Han Siwoo on his knees, surrounded by police, his dark eyes holding hers until the very end. The safe house was a small apartment in Gangnam, nondescript and safe. Ife spent 3 days in numb shock, watching news coverage. Mafia boss Han Siwoo, arrested in daring raid. Golden Serpent leader faces execution. Dozens of murders tied to crime kingpin. They showed his face, cold and emotionless in his mugshot, nothing like the vulnerable man who'd cried in her arms. On the 4th day, Ki-jun brought news. Trial starts in 2 weeks. His lawyers think they can reduce it to life in prison if he cooperates. But Hyungnim refuses to give up anyone in the organization. "Of course he does," Ife said hollowly. "He protects people even when it costs him." "Wisa Nim," Ki-jun hesitated. "There's something else. We found who tipped the police." Ife looked up. "Who?" "One of Park's surviving lieutenants. He wanted revenge for his boss. Gave police everything: bodies, weapons, financial records." Ki-jun's jaw tightened. "We've dealt with him. Dealt with, meaning killed." Ife should have felt something about that. Horror, maybe. Disgust. Instead, she felt nothing. Just emptiness where Siwoo used to be. "Can I see him?" she asked. "Siwoo, before the trial." Ki-jun shook his head. "No visitors except lawyers. Police orders. Then get me a lawyer credential. Fake paperwork. Something." "Wisanim, please," Ife begged. "I need to see him. One more time." Ki-jun studied her for a long moment. "You really love him," he said quietly. "Yes." "Even knowing what he is?" "Because of what he is, and what he tried to become. For me." Ki-jun nodded slowly. "I'll see what I can do." 5 days later, Ife walked into Seoul Detention Center wearing a lawyer's suit and carrying forged credentials that could get her arrested. She didn't care. They led her to a small meeting room. Bulletproof glass, phone system. And then they brought in Siwoo. He looked thinner, pale. There were bruises on his face. Prison wasn't kind to crime bosses. But when he saw her through the glass, his entire face transformed. "Ife," he breathed, picking up the phone. She grabbed hers, pressing her palm against the glass. "Hi," she said, tears already streaming. "You shouldn't be here. If they find out, I don't care. I needed to see you." Siwoo's hand came up to mirror hers against the glass. "I'm sorry," he said hoarsely. "For everything. For taking your freedom. For making you care. For—" "Stop," Ife interrupted. "I'm not sorry. Any of it. They're going to execute me, Ife." "I know. And you still came." "Of course I came. I love you." Saying it out loud, sober, clear, with no danger or adrenaline, felt like stepping off a cliff. Siwoo closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. "Probably not. But you have me anyway." They sat in silence, hands pressed against glass, phones clutched, just looking at each other. "I wish we'd had more time," Siwoo finally said. "I wish I'd been better, done better." "You were exactly who I needed," Ife said. "You protected me, respected me, loved me. That's more than anyone else ever did." "I want you to be happy," Siwoo said. When I'm—" He couldn't finish. "Don't," Ife begged. "Promise me. Promise you'll live. Really live. Find someone good. Have a family. Be the healer you were meant to be. Si-woo. Promise me, Ify. Please. She couldn't. Couldn't imagine a future without him. Couldn't promise to be happy while he died. But she looked at his desperate face and lied. I promise. Relief flooded his expression. Thank you, he breathed. The guard knocked on the door. Time was up. No, Ify sobbed. Please, more time. I love you, Siwoo said rapidly. You saved my life. You made me human. The guard opened the door. I love you, Ify said. Forever. Do you hear me? Forever. Forever, Siwoo echoed. Then they took him away, and Ifunanya Okonkwo sat alone in that room, her palm still pressed against the glass, and made a decision. She wasn't letting Han Siwoo die, not without a fight. Ify had 1 week before the trial, 1 week to do the impossible. She started by gathering Siwoo's inner circle, the men who'd been loyal, who'd protected her, who believed their leader deserved better than execution. Ki-jun, Min Seo, Dae-hyun, 5 others. They met in the safe house, and Ify laid out her plan. We can't break him out, she said, standing at the head of the table like she belonged there. Too risky, too many casualties. And Siwoo would never forgive us for turning him into a fugitive. Then what? Ki-jun asked. We prove he's more valuable alive than dead. The men stared at her. How? Min Seo asked skeptically. Ify pulled out a folder. Information she'd been gathering for days. The Golden Serpent controls 60% of organized crime in Seoul. If Siwoo dies, that power vacuum creates chaos. Rival gangs will war for territory. Innocent people will die in crossfire. She met their eyes. But if Siwoo lives, if he cooperates with police, gives testimony against international trafficking networks, helps dismantle the very systems he used to profit from, he becomes the government's most valuable asset. You want him to become an informant, Dae-hyun said flatly. I want him to become a weapon against the people who hurt women and children, Ify corrected. The people he's spent years trying to stop within his own organization. This gives him a chance to do it officially. It's a death sentence, Ki-jun said. Every crime family in Asia will want him dead. He's already sentenced to death, Ify pointed out. At least this way, he dies doing something good. The men exchanged glances. What do you need from us? Ki-jun finally asked. Ify smiled, sharp and determined. Everything. The trial was a media circus. Reporters swarmed the courthouse. Protesters demanded justice. Victims' families screamed for blood. Ify stood in the gallery wearing a borrowed suit, her braids pulled back professionally, her heart in her throat. She watched Siwoo enter, hands cuffed, surrounded by guards. He looked thinner, paler, but his eyes were sharp. Those eyes found hers in the crowd. His expression transformed, shock, then joy, then fear. He shook his head slightly. Go, leave, don't do this. Ify shook her head back. Staying, fighting, for you. The trial began. The prosecution laid out their case. 17 murders, conspiracy, racketeering, money laundering. The evidence was damning. Bodies, forensics, financial records. Siwoo's lawyer put up a weak defense. There wasn't much to say. He'd killed those men. The evidence was solid. By day 3, conviction seemed certain. Then Ify stood up. Your Honor, I have information relevant to this case. The judge frowned. And you are? Ifunanya Okonkwo. I'm a nurse who treated Mr. Han. I have testimony about his character and actions that the court should hear. The prosecution objected. The judge overruled. Barely. You have 5 minutes, Ms. Okonkwo. Ify walked to the witness stand, her legs shaking but her voice steady. She was sworn in and sat down. The entire courtroom stared at her, this African woman who'd appeared out of nowhere. Ms. Okonkwo, the judge said. What is your relationship to the defendant? He saved my life, Ify said clearly. Multiple times. Murmurs through the courtroom. Please explain. Ify took a breath and told them everything. About being trafficked from Lagos, about the debt, about the men hunting her, about tripping over Siwoo in that alley and choosing to save him. He could have killed me, Ify said. I was a witness to his vulnerability, a liability, but instead he protected me. He gave me sanctuary. He respected my autonomy even when it would have been easier to just control me. He also kidnapped you, the prosecutor interrupted. He offered protection that I initially refused, Ify corrected. And yes, he enforced that protection against my will. But, she looked directly at the jury. The men hunting me were going to rape me, torture me, sell me again. Mr. Han stopped that, at great personal risk. He murdered 17 people, the prosecutor said. He eliminated a human trafficking network, Ify shot back. Park Dae-jung's organization was responsible for trafficking dozens of women and children. Mr. Han ended that, permanently. Ningam tinga ever defended Han Si-woo in public before. Si-woo stared at her from the defendant's table, his eyes wet. Ms. Okonkwo, the judge said carefully, are you aware that you're risking prosecution yourself by admitting to receiving aid from a criminal organization? Yes, Your Honor. And you're testifying anyway? Yes. Ify met the judge's eyes. Because sometimes the law and justice aren't the same thing. And Mr. Han deserves someone to speak for him the way he spoke for me. The courtroom erupted. The judge called for order. Ify wasn't finished. Your Honor, I've brought documentation, she said, pulling papers from her bag. Evidence that Mr. Han has been systematically dismantling human trafficking operations within his own organization for the past 11 years. Financial records showing he's donated over $500,000 to women's shelters and child protection services. Testimony from women he's rescued. She'd spent a week gathering this. Kijun and the others had helped, pulling records, finding witnesses. Mr. Han is guilty of murder, Ify continued. I'm not denying that, but he's also guilty of protecting people who had no one else, of trying to be better than the world that made him. And if you execute him, you're not just killing a criminal. You're killing the only person powerful enough to dismantle international trafficking networks from the inside. She looked directly at Si-woo. You're killing a man who finally found a reason to be human again. Silence filled the courtroom. Then Si-woo's lawyer stood up. Your Honor, in light of this testimony, I'd like to present a deal negotiated with the prosecution. Mr. Han is willing to cooperate fully with international law enforcement to provide testimony and evidence against trafficking networks across Asia. In exchange, we're requesting commutation of his death sentence to life imprisonment with possibility of parole after 20 years. The prosecutor stood, looking annoyed but resigned. The prosecution agrees to this deal, Your Honor. Mr. Han's knowledge is indeed valuable. The judge looked between them, then at Ify, then at Si-woo. Mr. Han, the judge said, do you agree to these terms? Full cooperation with law enforcement, life imprisonment, no contact with your criminal organization? Si-woo stood slowly. Yes, Your Honor. On one condition. You're not in a position to negotiate conditions. This one is non-negotiable. Si-woo's voice was firm. Ms. Okonkwo receives full immunity for any involvement with my organization. Her record is expunged, and her debt, the $42,000 to the trafficking network, is legally voided. The prosecutor started to object. And, Si-woo continued, I donate $600,000 to establish a fund for trafficking victims, administered independently. Ms. Okonkwo gets first access to employment and housing assistance. He was giving away half his remaining fortune, for her. Mr. Han, the judge began. That's my condition, Si-woo said flatly. She walks free, financially stable with a future, or I withdraw cooperation and you execute me. Choose. The courtroom held its breath. The judge looked at the prosecutor, whispered consultation. Finally, the prosecution agrees to your terms. Ms. Okonkwo will receive immunity and the financial compensation will be processed. Ify's breath left her in a rush. However, the judge continued, Mr. Han will serve life imprisonment with no possibility of parole for 20 years. During that time, you will cooperate fully with law enforcement. Any violation results in immediate execution. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. Then this court sentences you to life imprisonment at Seoul Detention Center. You will begin cooperation with law enforcement immediately. The gavel came down. It was over. Siwoo had lost everything. His freedom, his empire, his future. But he'd saved her. Guards moved to take him away. "Wait," Ify called out. "Please, 1 minute." The judge hesitated, then nodded. Ify ran to the defendant's table. The guards let her approach, barely. She stood in front of Siwoo, tears streaming down her face. "You just gave up everything," she choked out. "I gave up nothing that mattered," Siwoo said softly. "Everything that matters is standing in front of me. 20 years, Siwoo. 20 years. I'll wait 20 lifetimes if it means you're free." He smiled, sad and genuine. "You saved me first. In that alley. Every day since. This is me returning the favor. I don't want your sacrifice," Ify sobbed. "I want you. You have me. You'll always have me." Siwoo's eyes held hers. "Promise me you'll use that money. Build something good. Become the healer you were meant to be. Live the life I could never give you. I'll wait for you," Ify said fiercely. 20 years. I'll wait." "Ify, I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you. I'll wait. And when you get out, we'll have the life we should have had." Siwoo's control broke. Tears streamed down his face. "I love you," he whispered. "I love you," Ify replied. The guards pulled him away. Ify watched him go. This man who'd kidnapped her, protected her, respected her, loved her enough to give up everything. The last thing she saw was him looking back at her, his eyes holding a promise. "I'll come back to you." And Ifunanya Okonkwo stood in that courtroom, surrounded by strangers, and made a promise back. "I'll be waiting." 20 years later, Ifunanya Okonkwo stood in front of Hope Memorial Hospital, the building that bore her mother's name and her own dreams. It had taken every one of Siwoo's 600,000 donation, plus years of fundraising, but she'd built it. A hospital specifically for trafficking victims, immigrants, and anyone who couldn't afford care. The best nurses, the best doctors, all free. It was her mother's legacy. And Siwoo's redemption. Ify was 45 now, her braids shot through with gray, her body carrying the weight of 2 decades of relentless work, but her eyes were still fierce, still kind, still waiting. Dr. Okonkwo, her assistant, a young woman from the Philippines Ify had helped escape an abusive marriage, appeared at her office door. "There's someone here to see you." "I have rounds in 10 minutes. I think you'll want to take this meeting." Something in her assistant's tone made Ify's heart stop. "Who is it?" Her assistant smiled. "He said you've been expecting him for 20 years. Ify's breath caught. She ran. Down the hallway, through the lobby, past startled staff and patients, out the front doors into the Seoul spring sunshine. And there, standing on the sidewalk with a single duffel bag, older and thinner, but unmistakably him, Han Siwoo. He looked 53. His black hair was streaked with gray, his face lined with age and prison, but his eyes were still dark as hell and fixed on her like she was the only thing in the world. Ify stopped 3 feet away, her entire body shaking. "Hi," Siwoo said softly. "Hi," Ify whispered. "I'm 2 days early." "Good behavior." "I've been counting days for 20 years." "I knew." They stared at each other, 2 decades of letters and visits and longing between them. Then Ify closed the distance and threw her arms around him. Siwoo caught her, holding her so tight she couldn't breathe, his face buried in her braids. "You waited," he choked out. "You actually waited." "I promised," Ify said, tears soaking his shirt. "I told you I'd wait forever." Forever is a long time. Not long enough. They held each other while the city moved around them. This nurse and this reformed criminal, this woman who'd saved his life and this man who'd given up everything for hers. "You built a hospital," Siwoo said, pulling back to look at her face. "You actually did it." "We built it," Ify corrected. "Your money, your sacrifice. This is as much yours as mine. It's all yours. Everything I did was always for you." Ify cupped his face, tracing the new lines, the scars, the evidence of 20 hard years. "You're older," she said softly. "So are you. Still beautiful." Liar. Never. Not to you. A small crowd had gathered, staff and patients watching this reunion. Kijun pushed through, older now, grayer, but still loyal. Hyungnim, he said, bowing. Welcome home. Siwoo smiled. The first real smile Ify had seen in 20 years. I'm not Hyungnim anymore, Kijun. Just Siwoo. A man trying to be better. You are better, Ify said fiercely. 20 years of cooperation. 17 trafficking networks dismantled. Hundreds of people saved. You did that. We did that, Siwoo corrected, his hand finding hers. Your testimony started it. Your hospital continues it. Our hospital, Ify insisted. They stood hand in hand while Seoul moved around them. What now? Siwoo asked quietly. Now? Ify smiled. Now we get the life we should have had. The wedding was small. Just Ify's friends from the hospital, Siwoo's loyal people, and a handful of trafficking survivors they'd both helped over the years. No media, no spectacle, just two people choosing each other after 20 years of waiting. Ify wore traditional Igbo attire, a coral silk blouse and wrapper with gold threading, her head crowned with a jewel. Her mother's, saved all these years. Siwoo wore a simple black suit, nothing designer, nothing expensive, just clean and respectful. They married in the hospital's garden, surrounded by flowers and hope, and people who'd clawed their way back from hell. The officiant asked, Ifunanya Okonkwo, do you take Han Siwoo to be your husband? I do, Ify said, her voice strong. I have for 20 years. Han Siwoo, do you take Ifunanya Okonkwo to be your wife? Siwoo looked at Ify like she hung the moon. I do. I did the moment she saved my life. Every day since. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you married. Siwoo pulled Ify close, finally allowed to touch her without barriers, without waiting, without prison glass between them. You're mine now, he whispered against her lips. Mine forever. I was always yours, Ify whispered back. From that alley, from that first moment. Ila Aradil, always had been, Siwoo breathed. Then he kissed his wife, like a man who'd waited 20 years and would wait 20 more if necessary. The crowd cheered, and two people who'd met in violence found peace in love. 6 months later, Ify stood in Siwoo's arms in their small apartment above the hospital, her heart racing. I have something to tell you, she said. Siwoo looked down at her, concern flickering. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. I'm pregnant. Siwoo froze. What? 8 weeks. I found out this morning. Siwoo's eyes went wide, then wet. We're having a baby, Ify confirmed, laughing and crying. I know we're older and it's risky, but… Siwoo dropped to his knees, his hands gentle on her stomach, his forehead pressed against her. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for waiting, for choosing me, for giving me this. Ify's hands threaded through his gray-streaked hair. Thank you for becoming the man who deserved it. They stayed like that, him kneeling, her standing, their baby between them, and let themselves believe in happy endings. 7 months later, Ify's labor lasted 14 hours. Siwoo didn't leave her side once, held her hand, wiped her forehead, whispered encouragement in Korean and broken Igbo he'd learned. When their daughter finally came, screaming and perfect and alive, Siwoo cut the cord with shaking hands. She's beautiful, he breathed. Like her father, Ify said exhaustedly. Like her mother. They named her Hope Okonkwo Han, for the hospital, for the future, for the impossible thing they'd built from violence and trauma and choice. Siwoo held his daughter, this tiny creature who existed because he'd chosen redemption over death, and cried. I'll protect her, he whispered, the way I protected you, the way I should have been protected. She'll never know fear. She'll know love, Ify corrected. That's better. Siwoo looked at his wife, this woman who'd saved him in every way possible, and their daughter sleeping in his arms. I was dead for 17 years, he said quietly. You brought me back to life, twice, and now we made life together. We did, Ify agreed. I love you, Ifunanya Okonkwo-han. I love you, Han Si-woo. They sat together in that hospital room, the same hospital Ify had built with his sacrifice, and let themselves be a family. Outside, Seoul moved on. Crime continued. Darkness persisted. But in room 314 of Hope Memorial Hospital, light won. Two broken people had chosen to heal together, had chosen love over trauma, had chosen life over death, and that was the truest victory of all. 5 years later, Hope Memorial Hospital had expanded to 3 locations across Seoul. Ifunanya Okonkwo-han ran them all, a fierce advocate for the vulnerable, feared by traffickers and beloved by survivors. Han Si-woo worked in the hospital's outreach program, using his knowledge of the underground to help law enforcement dismantle trafficking networks. He'd saved 63 people in 5 years, 63 lives as penance for the 43 he'd taken. It would never be even, but it was something. Their daughter Hope was 4 now, bright and brave and bilingual, speaking English, Korean, and Igbo with equal fluency. She played in the hospital's children's center while her parents worked, surrounded by love and safety. She would never know containers, or fear, or hands that hurt. She would only know parents who fought their way through hell to give her heaven. One evening, Si-woo found Ify in her office reviewing patient files. "Come home," he said gently. "Hope wants you to read her a story." "Which one?" "The one about the nurse and the serpent." Ify smiled. They'd written it together. A children's book about a healer who saved a wounded snake, and the snake who learned to be gentle. "That's her favorite," Ify said. "It's mine, too." Ify stood, taking his hand. They walked home together, 50 paces above the hospital where their story began, and found their daughter waiting with the book. "Mama! Papa! Read it!" Hope demanded. They sat on either side of her, and Si-woo opened the book. "Once upon a time," he began, "a healer found a wounded serpent in an alley." Hope listened raptly while her parents read. This story that was theirs, that was history and fairy tale and truth all at once. When they finished, Hope asked her usual question. Did they live happily ever after? Ify and Si-woo exchanged a look. They lived, Ify said. And they were happy. Not perfect, not easy, but happy. "That's good enough," Hope declared. "Yes," Si-woo agreed, his arm around his wife, his daughter in his lap. "That's more than good enough." And in that moment, in that small apartment above a hospital built from blood money and redemption, Han Si-woo was grateful for the woman who'd tripped over him in an alley 26 years ago, for the choice she'd made to save him when logic said run, for the love that transformed a monster into a man, for the life they'd built from ashes. He looked at Ify, and she looked back, and they didn't need words. They had forever, and forever had finally begun. The end, besties. Drop a comment below. Which moment made you cry? Would you wait 20 years for your love? Let me know. And if you want more stories like this, impossible love, fierce redemption, dark romance that hits different, smash that subscribe button. New stories every week. Love you. Character count, 10,489.